All right, thanks for coming. And this is basically a research based on my PhD thesis, some of my PhD thesis, especially about the effect of Guanxi on political representation in Taiwan. So I'll start, actually control my time here. Okay. So this concept, Guanxi, is probably one of the concepts cannot be more familiar to China study, right? It's often translated as political, personal relations or social networks, sometimes as particularistic ties. And behind that idea is that this focus is on sort of a personal ties more than on impersonal roots. And here I want to emphasize that there's a debate about to what extent Guanxi is unique to China or ethnic Chinese communities. There is actually both culturally universal and culturally specific. You can find some similar phenomenon in Brazil, such as 𝗬𝗻𝗲, or Blat in Russia, or Wasta in many Arabic nations, which share quite a lot of commonalities with Guanxi. Of course, differs in some other aspects. But compared to those concepts, Guanxi is probably one of the most studied concepts in the literature. And much of the work has been focused on the authoritarian context, actually, such as the Guanxi's impact on China's economic growth, Guanxi's impact on the Communist Party's Communist Party members' cadre promotion, which is one of the hottest areas in Chinese political science. And also in management and business studies, there's a whole lot of literature on how Guanxi influences entrepreneurship. And also in sociology, you know, some of big names like 𝗵𝗫𝗫𝗫𝗫 studies how Guanxi shapes labor markets in China. And the list goes on and on. Here, the question I am interested in is what role does Guanxi play in democracy? And this study basically joins a small but growing body of literature, especially in Taiwan. So there's some early studies in Taiwanese political science about factions, which is sort of a product of Guanxi. Most of those focus on the KMT's relations with factions, or in Chinese called 𝗏𝗍_系, especially during the KMT authoritarian period. So more recently, there are some scholars led by National Zhenju University's Zhang studying how kingship relations shapes people's vote choice and political participation. So here, my study is sort of focused on a different aspect, which is political representation, and I argue that Guanxi can profoundly shape the priorities of voters when they evaluate a national lawmaker. So I base this argument on two studies. One is qualitative, and the other is experimental. I'll start with the qualitative studies, which I use observation and interviewing. So I did some in-depth interview with 10 staff members of the Legislative Yuan, the Taiwanese Parliament. And I tried to deliberately balance the party identities of those interviewees, but of course it's not sort of a representative. So there are 5 from DPP, 4 from KMT, and 1 from the third largest party at the time, the New Power Party, 时代力量. And I also did a participant observation on political canvassing, surgeries, and also took part in the staff recruiting programs from both DPP and KMT. So the results based on those interviews and observation, of course, is sort of exploratory, but you cannot draw causal inference. So here's the theory. So there are basically 2 competing priorities in the work of a legislator of any democracy. The main part, or the most salient part, is lawmaking, as its name implies, which is about making national laws on those national issues. But there's also another aspect, which is relatively less studied. It's called constituency service. This is dealing with sort of personal matters on behalf of individual voters. For example, let's say if I wanted my passport as quick as possible because of a family emergency, the usual bureaucratic procedure requires a week or 2 weeks. now I need it urgently. So I might come to my lawmaker, and the lawmaker can negotiate with the bureaucracy and speed up the process for me on a case-by-case basis. So it's basically making some exceptions. So the relationship between the national policy and constituent service is more like a general rules versus exceptions. So service is making exceptions under those exceptional circumstances. So when those policies are sort of consistently enforced, constituency service should just play a residual role. That's what happens in most industrial democracies in the US, in the UK. Service is important, but it's never sort of the dominant theme of a legislator's work. But when those policies are not consistently or universally enforced, then the value of service can be increased. So this is where Guanxi can fit in. So for some Taiwanese voters, the way to get things done is to know a power figure who can either directly offer the help or act as a middleman in liaison with someone who could. So basically, this Guanxi mentality is to get things done through sort of another person's sort of informal networks, and they use lawmaker as such a middleman, as a problem fixer, and using the lawmaker's influence to get their personal things done. So one of the here are some quotes from my interviewees. One of them was a KMT staff. He said basically many people perceive national lawmakers as figures of power, and they can make the best of the lawmakers' influence to get around laws through backdoors. Another a chief staff from DPP says average voters care about protecting their own interests. So when penalized for breaking the law, they may hope to minimize the loss. That is the major reason that leads them to representatives. So government officials do not give a damn if an ordinary citizen approaches them. Only representatives, that is not lawmakers, have the privilege to coordinate and communicate with the authority. So to give you some sort of a vivid examples, one of the most popular sort of a casework in service casework or service request in Taiwan is getting hospital bed. This is when there's a flu season. Usually in Taiwan, especially in major cities, people waiting in line for emergency room beds. So this, when people are waiting, and they probably wait for hours, sometimes wait for days. So some of them chose to call their lawmakers. So one of the staff said, there are hundreds of kinds of requests. Some pleaded for free beds, some needed 2-bedroom, and others asked for the extension of stay, and some others just want the doctor to give extra attention to the patient. So 多看一眼病人. So citizen hospital is one of the most popular, but there are many other examples. For example, get a pothole in the road fixed in front of your door, or enroll a pupil into elite school. If you talk to school administrators, such as admission offices, right? You will hear a lot of stories that they're receiving calls from legislators, both national lawmakers and city councilors, to help their constituents enroll into their school. And to remove traffic tickets was sort of an old-fashioned practice. Now it's disappearing, but quite popular before, sort of in the 1990s. And also to reduce debts, to look for jobs. And also civil servants might come to lawmakers because they want lawmakers to help them promote their job. And lastly, during the traditional holidays, the train tickets are very hot. It's sort of a hot commodity. And then some people chose to call lawmakers to book train tickets because lawmakers can talk with the public company, the Taiwan Railway, and to get some extra tickets. So those are examples, and there are many other sort of different categories here. So you might wonder that why do members of Congress welcome casework with open arms because much of their job should involve lawmaking instead of personal matters. But those lawmakers know that in a Guanxi society, there is a thing called 人情, or the normal reciprocity, which means a successfully solved casework can create a sense of obligation on the end of the voter to repay the debt at the ballot box. So this 人情 compels the voter to sort of reciprocate the help they receive at the ballot box. Because of the reason, the members of Congress in Taiwan actually were deliberately soliciting service requests during the campaign time and also outside campaign time. I'll give you several slogans here they put either online or offline. One of them is just to need one call, service will arrive. Always send me around, always find me when you need, always act swiftly when you ask. This is not about policy issues. They find the legislator to solve their personal matters. And every day you can see me, every day you can find me. And lastly, service easy to find and favor easy to ask for. Here, this last one, the favor easy to ask for, is actually a local term in Taiwan. It's called 好养教. Some people call it 好养家 or 好养家. It's sort of a Taiwanese term that's not very commonly used in even the Taipei area. But one of the legislator, the national legislator, you can see from the graph, named 𝗦𝗫𝗲𝗿, actually named his service team as easy to ask for favor service team. So 好养家服务团队. So this is sort of a deliberate effort to solicit service requests. And they know that they will benefit at the ballot box. So this has consequences. The main consequence is the importance of service in the work of a legislator. Here's from a survey conducted by Shen Xingyuan in 2011. Basically, she asked the legislative staff, what is the focus that most lawmakers have? And then you can see that 80% of legislative staff said most lawmakers devote more attention to constituency service, and only 15% of the legislative staff interviewed said most lawmakers devote their attention to national policy. So it's a huge imbalance. And according to my interviews, most of them actually blame that or attribute this imbalance upon voters. They think it's a demand-side problem. One of the key MT said, service involves all sorts of things, virtually from the cradle to the grave, covering every and each stage of life. There's huge demand from voters. And another one, a DPP chief staff, actually said that very sarcastically, that we're national customer service centers. And a third one, also from DPP, from the South actually, said that voters from the South treat their legislators as gods and goddesses. They come to lawmakers for anything, literally anything. So they sort of think that this sort of huge imbalance between service and policy should be attributed to the voters' demand. So here I conducted study 2, which is, the purpose is to sort of test some of the insights that I drew from the field work. The first hypothesis I want to test is overall Taiwanese voters place more emphasis on service than policy when evaluating a national lawmaker. That's according to the interviewees. And second hypothesis is both from the literature as well as from the field work. That is, voters' preferences between policy and service should vary with their income levels. That means for the poor voters, the lower income level voters should prefer service and find service especially appealing to them. And higher income voters should find policy more appealing and attractive to them. And third one, also from literature as well as from in the interviews, that is the role of 人情 or the normal reciprocity. So basically they argue that for those who value Renqing, strongly value Renqing, or strongly value the normal reciprocity, they should find constituent service candidates particularly attractive. And the more they value Renqing, the more they should prefer service. And lastly, that's much based on the interviews that I have, which is the perception about Guanxi society as the perception about Taiwan as a Guanxi society. So basically, the voters' policy service preference should vary with how much they view Taiwan as a Guanxi society, where direct personal ties and are essential in achieving personal success and in accessing public service. So when they think the Guanxi is essential in achieving personal success and accessing public service, they should find constituency service more appealing. Otherwise, they should find policy more appealing. So in order to test those hypotheses, I did an online experiment in late December 2019, roughly 3 months before the election. And 660 respondents were recruited, where I cooperated with National Zhenji University, the Election Study Center. And respondents were randomly assigned to 3 groups. The first one is service group, and then the policy group, and lastly, the control. Here, just give you a sense of how they sort of see the questionnaires. So for the service group, the respondents will see these 2 candidates. On the left, Lin Ronghua, on the right side is Cai Zhichen. Of course, the left and right side is randomized in practice. And then Lin Ronghua was kept constant across different groups, and only Cai Zhichen was manipulated across 3 different conditions. And here, the service Cai Zhichen, I highlight his record of constituent service, handling 3,000 casework in total, seeking hospital beds, getting local roads repaired, and also getting funeral subsidies for the constituency in the district. And also use the slogan at the end. You can see that you can see me every day and find me every day, in order to signal that this person is service focused. For the policy group, they see also Cai Zhichen and Lin Ronghua, except that the part of the service part of Cai Zhichen was replaced with a policy-focused record and a slogan. So here, Cai Zhichen proposed 56 bills and also improving road quality by increasing national budgets, and also revising National Health Insurance Act, as well as the funeral administration to increase subsidies. And at the slogan, you can see that this is to signal that the candidate is sort of a professional lawmaker focusing on national issues. And control group, the parts that manipulated was replaced with just a typical working hard candidate record that does not mention anything about policy or service. So for the dependent variables, I tested 3 different measures. One is likability, and then competence, and then approachability. And I calculated the overall preference score for Cai Zhichen. Here, the first hypothesis, remember that according to the legislative staff, as well as actually some other studies in the past, they thought that the overall Taiwanese voters should place more emphasis on constituency service than national policy when they evaluate a national lawmaker. And I try to say whether this is sort of supported by my experimental results. And unfortunately, although the service and policy candidates on all 3 different measures were sort of more popular than the control, but the service candidate was not significantly more popular than policy. And there was no clear preference between service and policy among the respondents. So this is a bit surprising to me. And then I tested some other hypotheses. This one is about there's two competing hypotheses. One is income, the other one is 人情. On the left is income. Here I use a social class, but based upon family income. And we should expect that lower income respondents should prefer service. And the higher income respondents should find the policy candidate more attractive. But there's no difference between the higher, lower income groups. And then on the right side is normal reciprocity or 人情. And we should expect that those who value 人情 should find constituency service very attractive. And also we should expect that when they become more 人情 oriented, they should, the service candidate should be more popular, which is this red line should go up, actually. But again, just like income, there was no effect on of 人情 on the candidate preference. So both the 人情 and income were not supported by my experimental results. And here comes to some other things which is interesting. So I also tested the Guanxi's role in personal success. So, and to measure this perception about Guanxi, I use this item, to succeed, working hard alone is not enough. Of great importance to success is whether you have Guanxi connections and backdoors. And here you can see that on the graph, the x-axis has three groups: service, control, and policy. The y-axis is the overall preference score for the candidate. Starting from the service candidate. So you can see this blue line represent those who thought Guanxi was essential in achieving their personal success. So service candidate was significantly more popular among those who thought Guanxi was essential in achieving their personal success, compared to those who thought Guanxi was not essential. And this Guanxi has no effect on control group. And here on the policy group, it's interesting that when they thought that Guanxi was very essential in achieving personal success, policy candidate becomes less appealing compared to those who thought Guanxi was not essential. But the relationship here on the policy group was not significant. But the direction is sort of expected. Here comes to the role of Guanxi in accessing public service. Again, we start from the left. So x-axis has three groups: service, control, and policy, and y is about the candidate's overall preference score. Again, you see that service candidate is especially appealing to those who find Guanxi was critical in accessing public service. And when it comes to policy, this direction is right, but not statistically significant. That is, policy candidate was particularly appealing among those who found that Guanxi was not critical in accessing public service. And here, because the interaction is sort of symmetrical, so I flipped a moderator with the independent variable, and that comes to the graph on the right side. So for the x-axis, here is the how important Guanxi is in accessing public service. So 4 is very important, 1 is not important at all. And then y-axis represent the overall preference score for the candidate. You can see that 3 different lines. The green line represents the policy-focused candidate. The right line represents the service-focused candidate, and the control is the blue line. And here we focus on this policy and service candidates. You can see there's a cross on the left side of the cross, where Guanxi was considered not essential in accessing public service. The policy candidate was significantly more popular than the service candidate. On the right side of the cross, service candidate was more popular than the policy candidate, although it's not statistically significant. Although that means that direction is right, but not significant results. So just here it comes to a summary. So based on the two studies, why the legislative staff believe that constituent service is more important than national policy when Taiwanese voters evaluate the national lawmaker. So my experiment does not support that sort of perception. We don't find any clear preference for service over policy among Taiwanese voters. That said, we do find that Guanxi tilted voters' preference towards constituent service at the expense of national policy. When Guanxi was perceived as essential in achieving personal success and in accessing public goods, the service candidate became significantly more appealing to voters. However, when voters view Taiwan as a rule-based society, where Guanxi does not play a critical role, then the policy candidate drew significantly more favorable evaluations than the service candidate. So, in other words, the Guanxi perception matters. When they believe that Guanxi is important in their life and in accessing public service, the service candidate becomes more important, or constituency service becomes more important. And then when they find that Taiwan is rule-based and Guanxi is not that kind of a dominant factor in getting resources, then they will prefer national policy-focused candidate. And they don't want a candidate who deal with personal matters such as seizing a hospital bed, getting train tickets, and other things. So this is it, and thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your feedback.